Okay. For this particular lesson and the stuff that I want to cover in this, we are looking at 3 years of LEQ sets of questions. So I'm going to explain kind of what that means and how we kind of deal with that. So the purpose of the LEQ is this is a 35-minute essay. So you get 35 minutes to write it. Most students write it in less time than that, though I don't recommend it. So you have 35 minutes that they recommend that you spend on this, and you write it off the top of your head. You get nothing other than the question. So all you get to have is the question in front of you, and then you just need to know things. I have a feeling some of you might have little mini panic attacks today because you're going to realize how much you need to just know. I want you to realize, though, we're not into review yet. So you need to kind of keep in mind, like, you are going to have to go through a review process for this class, and so students who tend to not do well, one of the major pieces of feedback that I get from them is, well, I didn't really study enough. It's a you problem, not a me problem necessarily, so I just want you to realize that. I am, and I realize this, gonna make it look very easy because I majored in history and I teach this class. And I understand that it will probably not be as easy for you, and that's okay. That's why we're starting to practice it right now. What you get for the LEQ are 3 options. And what happens within each of the options is that they are specific period ranges. So question number 1, I think actually technically it's question number 2 because DBQ is question number 1. It's weird and confusing, sorry. We'll look at a full exam later. But the first LEQ option will be essentially colonial America. So it will go up to kind of the early 1800s, like the very early 1800s. Question number 2 will essentially be the 1800s. And question number 3 will be 20th century, so the 1900s. And that's always the case. So you always get 3 options. You answer one of them. So when you take the AP test, you actually take the multiple choice first, and then you go into the writing section and you do the SAQs. And you do 3 out of 4 SAQs, which is one of the reasons that we practice them so much. And then you write the DBQ, which is why we practice that with the structured academic controversies. And the LEQ, the long essay question, is the last thing that you usually write. Technically, you can switch the LEQ and the DBQ, technically, but I don't recommend it. I will say for IB, the LEQ is the most similar part of the exam to what you will have to do next year. Basically next year's exam for IB are longer LEQs. So it's worth knowing how to do them well. I'm going to tackle this in phases, so I'm not going to go through everything for the LEQ today. Like, I have guides for how to break down paragraphs for different kinds of questions. That's not what I'm going to focus on today. What I'm going to focus on today is if you have 35 minutes to write this essay, within 5 minutes, I want to have context, I want to have a rough thesis, and I want to have a skeleton outline. And that's what I'm going to kind of show you how I do. I'm going to do it slow at first, but then some of the later ones I'm going to do at speed. So I'm going to actually do them like as quickly as I can, basically, and just kind of let you watch the process. Again, keep in mind, we haven't reviewed any of this information, so if you're looking at this going, I don't remember any of this, well, yeah, you haven't reviewed it lately, so that makes sense. We're going to start in 2017 and just look at this question set, and then we'll move on from there. So in 2017, you had 3 different options. Evaluate the extent to which you will notice that as a theme, they almost always ask it, which is why we practice it so much. Evaluate the extent to which religion shaped political ideas in British North America from 1730 to 1783. Or, evaluate the extent to which the emergence of regional identities shaped the political development of the United States from 1800 to 1848. The last one, which we'll almost always kind of go over, you guys, right now because we haven't covered it yet, but the last option, evaluate the extent to which debates of religion or moral values shape political ideas in the United States from 1960 to 2000. So you have a choice and you have to pick one of them. For the sake of today, I'm going to do the first two, and I'm going to do these relatively slowly. I'm going to do this on here. Actually, you know what? Pause for a moment. I don't think that this is going to... Oh. Save. I don't think that this is going to slow my document down too much, but if it does, then I might have to kick you off, and I apologize. I know you can see it, but I have a feeling you're going to want to have it later. Alright, so we need context first. Evaluate the extent to which religion shaped political ideas in British North America from 1730 to 1783. Okay, well that's the time period of the First Great Awakening. Which again is why I said don't freak out, because there's a lot of stuff you just have to know. I know that. That's when the Great Awakening was. That's when the First Great Awakening is. I cannot talk about that in my context though. Because remember, what we are contextualizing is the thing right after evaluate the extent to which. Well, the thing that we are evaluating is religion shaping political ideas. I do not want to contextualize British North America in 1730 to 1783, which means I need to go earlier than that. Okay, so if I'm looking at religion shaping political ideas in America in early time periods, like early colonial America, I know that in New England, so I'm thinking, so like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, we're going to stick with those because I know that those are true off the top of my head. There's a lot of religion meshing with politics. So I know that this is where the separatists or the Puritans came to America to escape religious persecution in Europe, and they wanted to set up societies that were informed by their religious beliefs. You're going to see how bad my spelling is throughout this. It's going to be great. This is stuff I know. This is where the studying will eventually come in. So what I'm doing right now is I'm kind of laying out, what do I know about how religion and politics have meshed together in America outside of the time period that they specified. So this is one example. Remember, your context doesn't have to be super long. You're aiming for something in the realm of about 2 to 3 sentences, maybe up to 4, you don't have a lot of time. So I can write 2 to 3 sentences about this. And then I kind of just want to wrap this up by basically connecting this idea, remember our transition, how do I connect this idea to British North America in the to the First Great Awakening? Cool. I have context. You know what? Let's do this. That makes more sense. So, I have context, I have a transition, I need a thesis. How much does religion actually influence British North American politics during this time period? Which means I need to understand what is happening politically during this time period, and I also need to understand what the religion is. Here's the thing. Off the top of my head, I don't really remember what's happening in politics in the 1730s. I don't. I'm sorry. All I remember is the Navigation Acts, and that's not really religiously motivated. However, I do know that this encompasses the time period during the rising tensions. So when they're kicking back against British policies, this also covers everything up to the Constitution. And I know that deism is very heavily influencing the constitutional founders, and that we have a Christian law system based on Christian values. So this is my argument. I'm essentially going to argue that religion is an important value that we essentially demand politicians have, and it's a value system that we want to see reflected in our laws, but there is no direct control from a religious organization to the laws that are created. That's the argument that I'm going to make. So I'm going to change this. Remember, your thesis could be 1 to 2 sentences. I usually aim for 2. It takes the pressure off of me, because it's really hard in a really quick time period to be able to craft something that fast. That's pretty much my entire introduction. Done. I mean, I would have to turn this into actual sentences, but that's about it. It wouldn't take me that long. So when I'm looking at this, I'm contextualizing this with background of earlier examples of direct control. And I'm transitioning this into the idea that religious values are important in shaping political ideas, but like religion as an institution is not. If that makes sense. Questions so far? Good. Okay. Hot take. 2 body paragraphs. Maybe 4 if you write them really, really small. We'll get into that later. 2 body paragraphs. When we're looking at a skeleton outline for an essay that is 35 minutes long, I want you to make 2 really good points. And remember, these have to be thematic. So I want to look at the intersection between politics and religion. I already referenced deism. I definitely want to talk about that. I don't know how to spell this. Oh, I got it right. No, I didn't. Damn it. There we go. Cool. That's one of mine. So I'm going to talk about deism during this time period as a common trait among the founding fathers. That's one of the things I want to talk about, and now I need to think of something else I want to say. I want to talk about the First Great Awakening. Which means I actually probably want to switch which order these go in, because the First Great Awakening happens first, and that happens second. I wish they let you type these things. I can't even spell first. Those are my 2 sections. So when we're looking at this particular piece, I need specific pieces of evidence within each of these. I'm not going to do that with you guys today. That's not really the point of this. But relatively quickly, I have a full paragraph. So I have context, I have a thesis point, and I know what my major sections are going to be about. And remember, your conclusion is just you restating what you already explained. It's your mic drop. I proved that this was true because blah, 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 blah. Mic drop. Point. Yes. Done. You do not have to make sure that they are chronological. I am just a little anal, and I'm on a computer so I could switch it. You should make them as detailed as you need them to be. I don't always have sentences this long for in fact, I rarely have sentences that long for a skeleton outline. I just couldn't think of a way quickly to summarize that idea in my head. So sometimes the skeleton outline is much shorter, where it's only a couple words for the skeleton outline. But this is a fairly complex topic. In fact, a lot of students didn't pick this one that year because it was really complex. So no, they don't have to be that long. You also get scratch paper, and only the stuff that you write inside the boxes counts. So on the exam booklet, you can do this. You can create the skeleton outline and jot down a couple of ideas for context, and none of that gets graded. So also kind of going back to that point, do you have to make it chronological? if you planned ahead, or we could hiccup too. If you planned ahead, you could, but again, no, you don't have to. Does anybody have one of these that they want me to do next?
You should do 2018 number 1.
2018 number 1. Ooh, the transatlantic trade.
Love that one.
So this is the Columbian Exchange. This one was actually pretty popular because this is the Columbian Exchange and the Triangle Trade. So, evaluate the extent to which transatlantic exchanges affected colonial cultures in British North America in the periods 1700 to 1770. Alright, we are definitely looking at the slave trade for this. So we're looking at the development of the slave economy in the South especially. But we're also going to look at the Navigation Acts and finished goods. Yeah, we're going to talk about that stuff. Alright. Because they tell us that we're talking about 1700 to 1770, I have to contextualize before that, which is convenient because the Columbian Exchange happens way before that, and the Triangle Trade kicks up in like the 1600s. Actually, the 1500s. So that's what I want to do. I want to contextualize what the exchange is and what it is designed to do. We actually drew a diagram of this in class. If they don't give you that term, we know that term. This is the basis of what I'm going to talk about. So the Triangle Trade, which is the trade of goods specifically, and the Columbian Exchange, which is more of a food transfer and disease transfer, have massive effects on the economies and cultures of the Atlantic world. The Atlantic world is literally anything that touches the Atlantic, so Europe, Africa, and the Americas. It's just a faster way of saying that than having to say all three of those things. Need some examples. Did this do that in the first one? Oh, yeah, it did. Okay, interesting. All right. So we know that North America is growing its wealth by trading abundant raw materials for finished goods from Europe. Okay, so for context, I want to talk about the trades in general. So what do they do? What are you exchanging? So that's that raw materials, finished goods. I would probably try to be a little bit more specific, specifically citing lumber and fur coming out of North America, and eventually tobacco as well, in exchange for finished goods from Europe, like iron products, glass, fine sugar, distilled liquors. All of that stuff is coming out of Europe and coming into America because they don't have the capability to create it themselves. But I also want to talk about the origins of the slave trade, essentially replacing indigenous labor and having a massive effect on certain regions of North America, of British North America, specifically in the South, where it becomes more popular. I'm going to trade this slightly. Alright, for this one, I'm actually going to go with a slightly different route. So, I know now, I'm just putting this in as a placeholder, that what I want to talk about is the Navigation Acts. And I want to talk about the slave trade. Those are the things that I want to talk about. And in my thesis, I'm actually going to reference this. So this is kind of like referencing your categories of analysis. You don't technically have to do that. But in this case, I think it makes the most sense to do that. I'm trying to think of the right word. So I'm going to put the word in that I'm thinking in my head, and I'm going to explain why I'm not going to leave it. So the word brutalize is harsh. And what this does, because personally, I think it's accurate. But what it tells a reader immediately is exactly where I stand on this issue. And I don't know if I want to do that. So this is called bias in your writing. Sometimes it's totally acceptable, but when you are being evaluated by a stranger, which you will be on the LEQ, you might not want to tip your hat this early. You might want to avoid looking like you have made foregone conclusions about things that they don't know if you're educated about. So I need to think of a different word to put here that is accurate, but less sensational. I welcome suggestions in the in the chat. No, I don't want like effect. Like I want it to be negative. I just don't want it to be like this negative. I'm trying to think of like, it's not segregated, it's not dehumanized. Exploited is good. It's more academically acceptable, if you catch my drift. Like, exploited definitely works better in this case, because this is more of a common, way of describing it, where, like, across the political spectrum, if you said, people exploited Africans during slave labor, they'd be like, yes, they did. If you said brutalized, you're gonna get a certain subset of the population who'll be like, that's a strong word. Some of those people were at the Capitol the other day. Either way, one of them could be your grader, so don't put yourself out there like that. It's just not very academic. You may have those beliefs, not on this paper. Alright, we have everything done, and now we start to go into evidence writing. Yeah. We'll talk about it a lot more when we start to write our research topics, when you guys start to make assumptions about your research topic, and I'm like, how do you know? You haven't done the research yet. Well, I think it's true. Well, what if you're wrong? Fine. Let's see. So just keep in mind, like, we literally just did this one. So the extent to which immigration affected the United States culture from the period 1840 to 1898, we're literally looking at the new immigrants. So we're looking at how immigrants are kind of influencing. The hiccups are real today. We're looking at how immigrants influenced people who were coming in to the country in terms of how they affected our economy, how they affected society and society's response to them. That can all be part of that discussion as well. I think I probably have time to do one more that I'm going to do at speed. So I'm not really going to talk. I'm just going to do it as fast as I can. Which one you want me to do? You can make a hard one, you can pick an easy one, I don't care. I am gonna turn these blue because it makes it easier to kind of see them. Number 3. Fair enough. Keep in mind we haven't covered this in class yet, but I mean, it's a pertinent topic right now, so we should be good. Alright, it's 2:09. Let's do this fast. this is my explanation of what I did. So that took me 5 minutes. Hell yes. Alright. This is what I'm going for. So in 5 minutes, I know exactly what I'm doing. 2 of my points are done. I basically just wrote my entire introduction. I would need to like turn those into full sentences, so it might have taken me 6 minutes to actually turn it into a paragraph. But it's pretty much done. So what I'm going to talk about is that African Americans have had a long fight for civil rights, and I'm going to cite Reconstruction with these huge gains that are made with holding political offices, like Hiram, I don't remember his first name, from South Carolina. We see several different African American state legislators. During this time period, we see increases in voting rights with the 15th Amendment. We see increases in educational opportunities through the Freedmen's Bureau. I might name drop a couple of those just to be like, booyakasha, I know that crap. But I don't have to. But then I'm going to note that as Reconstruction ends, the KKK comes to prominence, the court system strikes down most of the civil rights legislation during the time period, and despite that, we still have leaders like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who, no, they don't get along necessarily, but they're both paving the way for civil rights activism, and it's their pushes that really pave the way for groups like the NAACP to even exist. So my thesis is, during the African American Civil Rights Movement from 1940 to 1970, it's never a bad idea to restate the question, African American activists rarely sought to tear down the institutional systems in American society. They are not trying to break American systems and replace them. Instead, they sought inclusion in the democratic process, both politically and economically. By the way, side note, I get this a lot, and I just want to point it out. People like to use the word seek. I am seeking something. And when they put it into past tense, they write seeked, which, don't get me wrong, I get, but English is stupid and it's sought. Just so you know. The skeleton outline, what I'm going to focus on. I know that there are 2 key pieces of legislation for the civil rights movement. These are actually out of order. There is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which I can specifically reference. I know this, so I didn't write it down. The dyslexia kicked in right there. And I want to talk about how these things are essentially designed to include African Americans in a system of democracy that already exists. So I want there to be a focus on educational activities, so things like Brown versus Board of Education, equal employment with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I want to reference the fact that African Americans aren't trying to take things away from, especially white people. They're trying to get the same opportunities that white people have already, like good education and good job opportunities, and the ability to stay in a hotel. And then the other part of my paper is going to be voting rights. So that's going to come back to the Selma marches and this idea that in order to be part of American society, you need to be a voting member of society. That is like the core tenet of American citizenship, is that you get to vote. So pushing for those voting rights acts through things like the Selma marches is like hella important. Yeah, I did it in 5 minutes. Like I said, if I had spent 6 or 7, I probably would have been just done with my intro. And then I have time to move into my other paragraphs. You need 2 minutes to do your conclusion at the end. Like, give yourself 2 minutes. That's it. So when they're like, wrap up your answers, which hopefully they do, that's when you stop writing. Mid-sentence. Stop writing. Skip a line and write your conclusion. Please. questions, concerns, anything you want to go over? I'm committed to being here for another 10 minutes, so I can do another one if you want. I'm not sure if it's helpful right now, or if you just kind of need to process. I can also do like pieces of this, so if you wanted me to do skeleton outlines for some of these, but not the context or the thesis, I can do that. Just put it in the chat and tell me what you want to see, and I will do the thing. Otherwise, just keep in mind you do have access to this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this up on the YouTubes with a link to this. 18 number 3. Yeah. I'm going to put a link to this on the YouTubes with a link to this particular piece in there as well. Why do you guys want the ones that we haven't even covered yet? Thank you, Claudia. You guys are good to go. Yeah, by the way, keep in mind, if you can't stay, like, go. It's optional. Paige, do you want the whole thing, or do you want skeleton outline? Number 2. But again, do you want the whole thing, or do you just want part of it? Skeleton. Alright, so I want to talk about... bubbles? So one of the things I would talk about with this one is the change in labor wages. So more immigrants drive the price of labor down, so this would be coupled with unskilled. No, we're gonna go with drove. It is drove. I'm doing a little bit more because you asked for the skeleton outline on this one. So these are kind of the points that I would make in here. So one of the things I would focus on is changes in labor wages and this idea that immigrants essentially drive the price of labor down. So I would be looking at how there's a massive number of immigrants coming in, and because that coincides with those new factory jobs that are unskilled labor, it has the tendency to drive wages down, and because of that, unions increasingly stop supporting that unskilled labor, which has a negative impact on immigrants. So it kind of leads to a situation when we're looking at American culture of kind of this increase in the working class or the poorer class of American society. Like, that's the effect that it has on American culture. I should probably put that in. That's kind of the thought progression I would go through in that one. Marvin, yes, I can go through that in just a second. And then 2018 1. Okay. In our body paragraphs, do we have to do the last sentence correlating leading to the... You don't have to, Alicia, but it's helpful. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. The second thing that I'm going to do for this one is I'm actually going to talk about settlement houses. And then I would probably want to talk about okay, so really quick, Marvin, for you to answer your question, the explanation for the body paragraphs is in the SAC directions, which are linked on the weekly agenda. That's where they're at. You have to keep in mind that anything to do with like sourcing and introducing your sources and stuff like that, it doesn't apply to an LEQ. This one you are literally writing kind of like you write your homework, in all honesty. That's actually one of the benefits of doing your homework that way. You're basically just talking about key topics off the top of your head. You're not referencing anything specifically. Like, there really shouldn't be any quotes in here. You're not going to be referencing documents because you're not going to have any documents. So for this one, it's basically just how many key terms can you get in or describe. Sometimes you don't have to know the key term. You can just describe it. So like you're going to see things like I have unskilled labor, labor unions, working class or the poor class, settlement houses, nativism, political machines. Like, that's my specific evidence. I just need to explain it. And then, so you do want me to do number 3. So like Paige and Melissa. So 2018 number 3. Let's put this here. Okay. Again, just the skeleton, or do you want the full one? Skeleton outline. Okay. Let's copy this. So evaluate the extent to which sustained economic growth affected United States culture in the period from 1940 to 1970. Okay, I know off the top of my head these are the two things I want to talk about. So I want to talk about a growing middle class. And to do that, one of the things that I want to talk about is the shift. Oh, okay. Oh, that caps lock that. I want to talk about the shift from an industrial economy to a service economy. I want to talk about increased consumerism. trying to think of. All right, so when I'm evaluating sustained economic growth in this culture, what I want to talk about is how that sustained growth kind of fostered a middle class. And part of the reason that it fostered that middle class was for a couple reasons. Number one, we had that shift to a service economy. We have an increase in consumerism between the 1930s, where everybody was very poor because of the Depression, and the 1940s, where people had money but nothing was being produced for consumers because of the war. All of a sudden in the late 1940s and into the 1950s, people were like, I'm gonna buy the things. That is coupled by a whole bunch of new technology like microwaves and like vacuums and floor buffers that become available. And then a lot of that is fostered by conformity and this desire to kind of fit in with American economic values driven by the Cold War. And so this sustained economic growth allowed for that consumerist conformity to happen. So that's going to be one of the things that I would talk about. The other thing I want to talk about is increasing worker protections. Unions become legally protected during this time period. I can't remember the name of the law that does this. There is one in the 1930s, but it gets strengthened again in the 1950s, and I would have to look it up off the top of my head. But again, you don't have to know the key term. You can just describe it. So I would talk about unions becoming more legally protected during this time period. And I would talk about how collective bargaining was also legally protected. So both of those things, when I'm looking at unions, I would say, to be fair, this is a lot more straightforward. I don't know which paragraph I would put first or second. It would kind of depend if I had actually reviewed this right before I wrote it. But when I'm looking at sustained economic growth in the United States, in that culture, there is a growing acceptance of unionized jobs and using collective bargaining for the betterment of all workers to foster a middle class that is essentially running the country. That's my outline. All good? Kind of? Alright, so you have these as examples. Just kind of keep that in mind. Obviously, you have the other questions. I don't typically ask stuff like this on tests because we're usually more focused on a specific time period. Otherwise, I give you a warning of like what else to study, and I will do that for our other exam as well. But you do have a couple other ideas. What I want to stress is evaluate the extent to which is at the beginning of every single one of these. Which means you kind of need to answer how much every single time.